Perfect. Okay. So welcome everybody. We all know each other, but just a little bit more detail. So Krista is a researcher, primarily researcher consultant, a PhD in philosophy and mass communications. And I recommend, Krista has been truly amazing for 4Gen Now. She helped put together a fantastic survey of like 35 questions that we used, 4Gen Now used, and we got a great response from our community. This was the end of the year. So there aren't many people that I have a personal testimonial whose services I have personally used and that I can attest to. But anyway, Krista has done a great job. All out of the goodness and greatness of your heart. So thank you very, very much, Krista, for your help in the past and for your time today and sharing some great nuggets of actionable content with our group. So please, with that in mind, take it away and we'll have fun. And Krista will go through her presentation and then questions. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Great. Krista, please.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Jim. That definitely builds me up quite a bit. We did have just a wonderful experience, I think, collaborating together on research, and I want to thank the others for joining us as well. One of the things that this group, 4Gen Now, does is gives us a chance to bring our areas of expertise into the dialogue and to communicate with one another about what it is we do. And I think research is very important for this particular group, especially for those that are startups, but also for those who are already involved in businesses, because what we want to make sure that we are doing from a research perspective, and certainly even in this group, is to make sure that the customer, the audience that we are serving, is at the focal point of everything we do. And research really gives us a chance to do that. So that's what I'm going to be talking about a little bit today. And I do want to tell you, if I break eye contact with you, it's because I am looking down at some of the notes. It's not that I'm trying to be rude, but I do have a presentation that I'm glad to share with you all. And this, of course, is just my perspective based on some of the research that I have done. But we definitely want to share knowledge as far as this is concerned. So I wouldn't want anyone to think that this is the gospel according to me. We definitely want to have a conversation about that. So if you don't mind, I'll just go ahead and get started. So what we're going to be covering today on this particular webinar, and this list is not exhaustive by any means, but what we're going to be covering is we're going to be covering some thoughts on getting the buy-in in terms of doing research from the executives, project managers, anyone that you as a consultant or your firm has to go to in order to get them to allow you to do research or even see the value of you doing research. We are also going to determine what type of research that needs to be done. We're going to be discussing that because that is very important, but it all depends on the problem or the guiding question for your research. So we're going to be talking about that as well. And then we're also going to be discussing how you can create realistic goals when you approach your research projects, or even just approach talking to people about doing research. And then finally, what we're going to do is we're going to discuss how you can present your results to key stakeholders, because that's going to be key. Because once we get the buy-in and we've determined what type of research and set our goals, we need to make sure that we don't waste anybody's time. Time is money. So we're going to be talking about how you can present your results, or the way you should present it, so that you can definitely keep the interest of the executives if you are lucky enough to get the time. One of the things, and I hope you can see that on your screen there, and most of you probably have seen this quote from Sam Walton, who was the founder of Walmart, and basically it just says that there's only one boss, the customer, and he can fire everybody in the company from the chairman on down simply by spending his money somewhere else. And I wanted to start off with this quote because I think it's important and it sets the stage for the dialogue between you as a researcher or as your company that employs researchers and the executives of the company or organization that you're going to be working for. Because if there's one thing that most executives from startups to big businesses agree on is that without the customer, they really don't have a business. And if they do have one, it's not for too long. So understanding their attitudes and their needs makes for good business. And the good thing about this is you look at your screen and you look at the question that you have there from the Bloomberg Business Week, you will see that executives are already kind of buying into this. 80% of the executives that were surveyed for this particular study said that increasing the quality of their customer experience is their top strategic goal for their company. So we already have the executive buy-in to a certain extent, or at least the ones that were surveyed for this particular study. And if we think of the business or the executives as the controllers of a particular garden, they're already in our garden. And as researchers, what we need to do is we need to make sure that we can show them how research will help to fertilize that garden and make their business and their bottom line grow. But it's a good thing that we already have the buy-in. 80% is a huge number as far as that's concerned. Now, even though in this particular presentation we are discussing from a business perspective, nonprofits and any organization, community, or group can benefit from some of these ideas, but I am kind of approaching it more from a business that's trying to make a profit. So one of the ways that you want to try to get the executive buy-in, and these are just some ideas that have worked for me, you need to be able to tell them or get them to understand that research is a valuable part of their business strategy. Research makes for good business. Because if you think of what a business strategy is, anyways, you think of it as it's a way to find out new markets, a way to develop new products or services, a way to grow the business. And at the center of that, no matter how you think about it, is the customer. So we want to make sure that when we are trying to articulate the value of research, that we communicate to the executive that it's an ongoing conversation between them and their audience. We're that middle person that helps them to facilitate this conversation. I was speaking to an executive here in Philadelphia that handles CX for a large company here. And one of the things that she said to me, one of the best points, and it's something that drives what I do as a researcher, she said that one of the things that her group always does is they make sure that the customer has a seat at the table. And this is literally and figuratively for sure, that they have a seat at the table when it comes to the decisions that are being made. So when we are trying to push this point of having an ongoing conversation with the executives, we want to make sure that we convey that research not only gives them a seat at the table, but it pulls out the chair, it makes sure they are comfortable, and it tells them that we want to know what it is they want. So the ongoing conversation that they can have with their audience is something that you want to push when you're trying to get the executive buy-in. And I know that if you're an executive or if you are a researcher or even consumers to a certain extent, the idea of having the customer be in charge, have the power to, whether you succeed or fail, that can be very intimidating, and it can also just cause a great deal of trepidation. But this is where you want to make sure that the executive knows that we don't want to fear feedback from our customers. And I'm going to be using customers and users, audience interchangeably throughout this presentation, but you don't want them to fear the feedback. The feedback is a proactive step. If you are an executive or CEO or a startup or UX designer of a particular application, and you've gone around the office and everybody says this is a wonderful, great idea and it works and so on, but you don't bother to go to your customer and see if they even consider it viable, if it's functional and so on, then you haven't wasted your time, but you really are creating a product that perhaps no one will use. And we have to think about this as a situation where we can no longer just say, if we build it, they will come. We have to change the mindset of the executives and trying to get them to buy into the value of getting customer feedback from the beginning, in the middle, and towards the end before it all goes out to market. And then even after it's gone out to market, we still want them to invest in the value of research. So you always want to make sure that they know that customer feedback is an important step. And one of the ways that you want to do this from a research perspective is you see in this particular slide that the customer is up at the top. We've already established that. We know that this is in fact what we are thinking about when we are designing our products or services. But we also want to make the connection for them, the collaboration between business and research. You always want to approach whoever is in charge of the research product or the application that you are going to be using. You want to let them know that as a researcher, you're working in collaboration with them and their business objectives. But at the center of all of this is the customer, and you want to make sure that you have them to understand that it's a collaborative effort with the goal of pleasing the customer in mind. So you might have the buy-in, you have them kind of excited, but maybe still a little bit skeptical whether or not research will work. But one of the key things that you want to do once you do get the go-ahead to do research is you want to identify your research goal. What is it that you are trying to find out? How can you define the problem? How can you devise a question that helps to guide what it is that you are going to be doing? And the reason why this is so important is because if you don't know what you're attempting to find out, how do you know if you've actually found out what it is that you set to find out? So identify your research goal at the very beginning. Excuse me. And so we should think of research as strategy. I already talked about the problem or the question that might be guiding your research, but you definitely want to define your problem. Now, this doesn't mean that just because you define it, that you go into your research, you talk to your customers, or you do your usability reviews or something of that nature, and you just say, well, I define this problem, this is the only thing I'm going to focus on. No, you don't want to do that, but you do have to have something guiding your overall research. And once you have defined the problem, the next thing you need to think about is who should be involved. So it could be as broad as having the project manager, having the executive who's over that project manager, having the UX designers. I've sat in on research where the UX designers are in there while people are using their product, because it gives them a wealth of information when they do that. So who should be involved? And of course, the customer is a given. So you need to be thinking about who should be involved. And then you also, after that, you would need to think about how you might get to the answers that you seek. And this is where you start to think about what methods of research might I use. And I'm going to give you some examples here in just a few minutes. And then after you've done all of that, you want to be thinking about how you measure it. So I said that I would give you an example. This particular a slide that you see here is an example of some research that I conducted. And I did just a usability expert evaluation on this particular site. This was a lady who just started this business, and she went and she created the website, and we weren't thinking at that time about increasing traffic, not at that particular time. She just wanted to get her ideas out there and become a kind of the go-to person in her particular community. So what she did was, of course, she came up with a quick design for her website, but she just wanted to know, how can I make this just a little bit more effective? So we came up with some small things. When I did this, the usability review, and it wasn't testing, it was just a review of her site, we came up with ways to use the contact form that you see off there on the right, so that her audience would always have a way to get in contact with her and use and get her services without having to click to a page that just was contact. So that's one of the things we did. The other thing that I suggested was this: when you're doing an in-home daycare, it's really important that they see that you're personable, that they see your personality. And so the pictures up top are, one of them is her child, the toys and so on in the backyard where she did some of her exercises. Those little things we put in there. Now you can look at this and say, oh yeah, there's a number of UX principles that we can look at, and we can do things differently. But the overall idea of evaluating this for her so that she could present herself in a manner in which she looked professional, but also gave the information and kept her personality, was what we did with this. And my recommendations were, of course, much more extensive than I just went through here. But that's one of the ways that you can think about research. It wasn't necessary for us to do usability testing with the people who are using her website, not at first, because that wasn't the problem that we were trying to solve. This next particular case, this was research that was conducted involving users and why they had a problem checking out after or making payments via the mobile devices. Now, the question that we had, the problem that we wanted to solve was, why is it that they don't complete the action on their mobile devices? So this is a perfect way or perfect problem for usability research. So we had people come in and we observed them going through the steps, and we observed why they were having a problem at this particular stage. So again, the problem was, why do they not complete it? We observed them so that we could tell why it was, what hung them up. We also talked to them while they were doing the steps as well. So that's one of the ways in which you really need to let the problem drive what type of research that you do. Now, I've talked about two research methods, but there are a number of others, and the list that you see in front of you is, again, not exhaustive by any means, but these are some of the research methods that I have used that have become very helpful in most of the questions that I have tried to answer. Focus groups are really great when you want to you want to determine how it is a particular user or community member, what have you, might use your product in the presence of others, how they might talk about it. I did research one time where we were trying to really get at how college students discussed sensitive matters such as race and gender amongst their peers. So we put them in a room, and it was guided just a little bit by research protocol, but at the same time, we stepped back and we wanted to find out how they would talk about these particular issues. And we wanted to see how these issues would come about in a group setting, and how maybe a nonverbal cue from a group member might change the way someone approaches an answer. Would they kind of get quiet if they saw someone was really passionate about an issue? And what we wanted to do this because we wanted to determine how, from a pedagogical sense, that we could use this information and restructure the type of classes that we taught. That dealt with that subject matter. In-depth interviews, as a former journalist, these are the things that I love. But when you do in-depth interviews, it's because that you want to find out, delve in a little bit more into your subject's attitudes and feelings, but you don't necessarily want to observe their behavior. So that's really good if you really want to get an in-depth view or an in-depth interpretation of how someone might use your product or your service. Surveys are also really good ways, and they're good ways for two reasons. If you've ever been a part of marketing research or you've ever done marketing research, you know that surveys can be very helpful in helping you to see if a product is viable. They can offer you very good general information. Now, when I say general, that's not a negative in any way, because sometimes that general data is what you need. But other times you can use surveys where you get the basic demographic information, kind of like the survey that Jim and I did for Jim Now. You get the basic demographic information, but then you also go into the more qualitative, open-ended questions where you can find out the information you really want to know. The demographic information is absolutely wonderful, but we just make inferences from that particular information. But we wanted to know how group members would use an organization like 4Gen Now, what level of commitment they were willing to make, and we wanted to get at some of the knowledge that would help us to make this group more productive. So that type of survey worked for us. The last thing that I want to talk about is the ethnography. Now, if you talk to anthropologists, they will say that a true ethnography takes months and even years to do. So we'll talk about this research in an ethnographic sense. And so one of the ways that you can think about doing ethnographic research, because we're seeing a lot of this happening, let's just say, for example, I'm a fitness buff. So if I were in the habit of using Fitbit all the time, I'm not, but let's just say that I do, and I would use it to check on my mobile. I might check on my computer. I might engage in a battle with someone else and how many steps they did and how many steps I could do. What a researcher would do, they would go to their environment and observe how all of this would fit in to their everyday activities. Now, it's very time consuming for sure, but it does give you an idea of how your product or service actually fits into the everyday lives of your particular audience. So it's a really good way to observe this, but at the same time, it is time consuming because you can't always send out a researcher to follow someone around and watch them use a product, but definitely worth it if you can. So now that you've already determined your problem and you've decided the method, you compile all of this data. And if you're like me, sometimes when you're thinking about all the data, it looks about like this, where you have all of your sticky notes and you're trying to make themes, you're trying to make categories. Yes, there are applications and programs that can do this for you, so you don't even have to think about doing that. But if you're an old-fashioned researcher before they had all of these programs, then you at least want to have some kind of idea of what the data tells you. And this might be what some of it looks like at some time. But what you want to make sure that you do is you want to make sure that you know how you are going to think about this. I took a class from lynda.com from Bill Chandler, and he came up with this acronym, definitely sloppy, and he even admits it himself, but KWYR WTS. And basically that means know what you really want to say. Now, by no means does it mean that you are so fixated on what you want to say that you don't listen to the data. Not at all. But you have to have some kind of idea of what it is that you're trying to say with your data. And for a data visualization expert like Bill Chandler, this makes complete sense. So you want to let your research tell the story. You want to drive home your particular points. Because if you think about it, if you get in front of an executive, you will probably have very little time. So you want to let your research tell a story, but it may be a very short story because your executives may not have time to listen to it. So you want to give it to them in bite-sized pieces. And here are just some of the ideas that I think will be helpful as far as this is concerned. You're lucky if you get 30 minutes. Sometimes you might get 10, sometimes you might get 15 because executives are busy as well as any of the people that are assigned to be a part of this project. So as a consultant, I've learned to really kind of make sure that I go in assuming that I have little time, hoping that I have a lot of time. So you want to summarize what it is that they care about up front. If you think of it as a way, think of it as you only having 5 minutes, or maybe even if you think of it as an elevator pitch, whatever you have to do to get into your mind that you only have a certain amount of time to speak to executives, that's what you need to do. But lead with what they care about most. And then if you get more time, then you want to go ahead and discuss the high-level findings so that you can get to those early as well. And then you always want to provide a conclusion. We think of things in linear order, beginning, middle, and ending. So you want to make sure that you conclude your findings. If you have a chance, give them a real quick summation of the key points. And then finally, the thing that is very key is you want to give them recommendations because you want to give them actionable steps. Otherwise, they would be thinking, well, it's wonderful that Krista did this study, but so what? What can I do with the information that she gave, that she found? Well, she's given me steps on suggestions, things that I can put into action based on what she found out from my customer. So I've given you a lot of things about research in a short amount of time, and I apologize if I went too quickly. But one of the things that I would like to leave you with just in this part of the presentation is you should always be learning. And maybe this is my academic background, or actually I think that this happened way before I ever became an academic. You should always be learning. You should always thirst for knowledge. And so I've come across a few websites and a few organizations that are really helpful in this sense. UserZoom is UserZoom and user testing. They provide really great case studies. They provide really good blogs that give you excellent information on the latest user testing, the latest ways to test your customers. They also provide you the latest information on some of the software, some of the new technology for using to test your users. And I am not in any way, shape, or form affiliated with either of these organizations. They're just places that I go so that I can learn more, because you want to be able to present yourself to the executives of whatever company you go to as someone who is either an expert or trying really hard to learn as much as he or she can learn. And this brings me to my next point. If you haven't gone to lynda.com and just kind of scrolled over some of the things that they offer, I just recommend that you do. I have taken classes in coding. I've taken classes in UX design, programming for Android applications, and so on. All of this so that when I get in a room with UX designers and I'm trying to convince them of something that one of their customers said, I can I can do so with some kind of conviction of what I'm talking about. Now, don't get me wrong. This doesn't mean that I go into a room full of UX designers and I say, no, I've taken this class. This is what you need to do. No, but I at least can be part of the conversation and understand where they're coming from, understand why putting this button may not be possible in the way that they've designed things. And then finally, listen to the people around you. One of the best things you can do, it's almost kind of a word of mouth. If you are sitting next to someone who is complaining about the fact that they can't do something with this website, they can't do something with this particular application, listen to them. Because that might lead you to a recommendation that you might give another website designer, or it might lead you to ideas on how you can possibly come up with an application to address something that they are complaining about. But there's always something you can learn from the people around you. So you always want to be listening. Okay, I think that's the end of my presentation. I definitely will take questions, but if for some reason I don't answer your question right now, certainly contact me at Chris CJW Consult. And make sure that you don't add the T on there because it's not consult, it's consult@gmail.com. And then I would love to connect with you via LinkedIn because this is all about sharing knowledge. This group, Forgin Now, is all about trying to share knowledge. So I would love to find out what it is that you do and how we could just kind of create this intellectual community, if you will, where we discuss things.
Awesome. Well done, Krista. Well done.
There's no applause button to hit, right?
Yeah, where is
they left that off this app.
Brewster, Steve, fire away with questions or comments.
Well, I have a simple one. Can you just email out those links? Because that's probably better than me trying to remember them.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. For the resources?
Yeah.
Sure. Absolutely.
So Brewster, Steve, okay if I give Krista your email so she can send that out?
Yeah.
Awesome. Good.
Yeah, so, someone who I hadn't spoken to in about 20 years, turns out we have a mutual friend, and it was in a Facebook discussion, and she was like, wait, is that the same Brewster Lamacchia that I went to school with? And I was kind of like, when I finally talked to her, I was like, how many people do you know with that name? Like, you just have to Google it. I'm the only one in the world. So it's like, yeah, these people that try to keep a low profile, there's no chance of that with me. So.
Very good. Steve, Brewster, questions, because I have some, but let's hear from you guys first, or comments. Steve.
Well, I've got a comment first here. Krista, I loved how, your presentation just flowed from your heart, even though you had some notes there. Can really tell that, this is something that's very authentic within you. I just wanted to express that. I look at this whole thing and I'm like, this is almost part of a sales 101 training, because whether you're trying to get some marketing done or you're wanting to do a one-on-one presentation, whether it's to executives or to somebody sitting at the coffee shop, it's amazing how many people I've talked to that they're so focused on their own product and service, and they don't take time to do research, they don't ask questions, and they wind up getting into a mode of manipulation. It's all about them. It's not really about the client, and I am like a big advocate for customer service. So everywhere I go, if I know there's a manager that needs to know about a situation, I'm actually offering research, just from observing. And at the same time, it's just what I expect everywhere I go. I'm looking at, well, why is that person doing that? I don't just fault them. If it's a server or someone behind the counter, for instance,
Mhm.
We're the owners. We're the executives. Why is this filtered down in there? Yes, it can be a little bit of their own behavioral profile or their personality, but a good executive or a good manager is going to know how to harness who that person is, and they'll become better people. But I'm just very appreciative that there's somebody else out there that really gets what research is all about from a very holistic perspective. I mean, you've barely scratched the surface with what you presented, but it was enough to tell me that you have a good grasp on the whole thing, and I'm looking forward to maybe having another conversation outside of this with you.
Awesome.
That would be great, and I think you touched on a number of key points, and the first one being that it is obvious, it is salesperson 101, but it's because of that people ignore it. They tend to just forget that good customer service makes for good business. They really kind of can't get out of their own bubble. I'm very fortunate to be exposed to some very creative people here in Philadelphia. And I'm constantly having a conversation about the products or services that they're creating and so on. But I at some point I say, but what exactly does that do for me? I'm your customer. What does it really do for me? It sounds great. It's really creative, but what are you really trying to do for your customer? And we want to almost have, like you were saying, just the example of going to the management to speak to them about something that should be a given. We almost have to call them on it, so to speak, so that we can begin the dialogue. So that we can say, you're offering really great X, Y, and Z, but what else could you be doing differently? Or why is this not a part of it? It just seems, as a customer, this should be something that you offer.
Well, my one question would be, you said that the customer should be at the focal point of the research, and a marketing partner that I've worked with on and off in the past, we started teaching people around here when it came to marketing, you have to become a student of your target market. But they don't have time to do research, or so they say. And I'm like, look, every time you hear somebody say something about your product or service, what do you mean by that? Or, well, how does that make a difference for you? If you just ask one little question, you're not even trying to do research.
Right.
You're collecting research and collecting data when you breathe. But my question for you, though, would be, do you find that a lot of these executives, I don't know what size companies you're referring to, but is their ego a big deal that gets in the way of them sometimes, not becoming a student of their target market? Is that what you see out there a lot, or what else would it be?
I would say that it's more along the lines of always thinking of the big picture and not thinking of the little pieces that go in. Even if we position the customer as the biggest piece of the puzzle, still they are thinking, well, driving business objectives. That's what they are thinking about. So that conversation that they have at a dinner party, and they may just overhear it where someone is complaining about their services. They may just overhear it, but don't necessarily act on it. Don't necessarily think that it means anything more than that. But as Brewster mentioned, just in terms of the social media, we know that once someone mentions something, it doesn't just crawl back to wherever it came. It has a tendency to really balloon. So I don't necessarily think it's ego so much as that they don't, they are not really focused on the smaller parts that get them to the larger business objectives.
Okay.
I think that that's what it is, because you from a creative standpoint, and one of the reasons why I don't say it's ego, because from the creative standpoint, if you talk to them, they're always talking about how they want to use their product to make things easier for their customer. They really do come from that place. So it's less ego driven and just I guess a little bit blind to the what's going on in their peripheral vision.
So they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And they're not willing to just take the time to listen, not conduct research, as you were saying, in the traditional sense, but just listen to some of the other things. For example, I was in a discussion and someone just kind of casually mentioned something negative about a particular company. And I was in the presence of someone else, and just that spreading of that information, but I was talking to someone who represents that particular company. And you don't want to fixate too much on all the complaints, but you have to kind of say, well, if there's one person saying that, what are the chances that's the only person saying that?
Apologies, I got to go grab a power cord, but I'm still listening.
My takeaway, Krista, what I loved about it is, and we couldn't have planned this any better because, as Steve, I think, knows, I'm planning a little pitch. I have a breakfast in Denver next month and looking as a nonprofit, looking to get some funding. But I loved really simple, but the 5-minute overview to the executives in terms of presenting your findings.
Oh, absolutely. Because
I'm going to use that. I mean, it's intuitive, but just to use that in the pitch. I mean, after the end of the presentation, okay, what have we discussed?
Exactly.
What's the action? What's the game?
Right.
What's the recommendation?
And if you think about it, even the conversations sometimes that Jim, you and I have had, we're both usually fitting this in to our busy schedules. And imagine if you're an executive of a Fortune 500 company or something like that, you are fitting this in. As valuable as it is, you're fitting it in, and it's the researcher's job to make sure you can get the key information in during whatever time frame that you are given. Now, I really haven't had it where I've had to whittle it down to 5 minutes. I've been given more time than that, but it's usually, sometimes it's 15, sometimes it's 10. One of the things we learned in grad school is you can have a dissertation that's 500 pages, but if you can't whittle it down to one sentence, you don't know what you're talking about. And that's that's kind of something that I keep in mind when I'm trying to convey what I found as far as my research is concerned.
Yeah.
Krista, for focus groups, and I might have asked you this in the past, but what's your recommendation for the maximum number in a focus group? And again, I guess the context would be, a small company with 10 or fewer employees looking for market research. So if we brought together, what might you recommend in terms of the maximum number for a small size company as the client?
It depends on what it is that you are researching. Are you trying? Give me an example of what you.
No, this is quite selfishly, but before I go into that, Brewster, if you have a more germane question, please fire away.
No, my applications is more business to business, and what I kind of find, businesses are made of people, and the same considerations that apply to consumer marketing really apply to business, but you got to morph them around a little bit because business decisions are 99% hopefully based on needs, whereas consumers, it's all over the place, right? So yeah, my thing today was just, it sounded interesting. I've got, I'll call them a customer. Not paying me money yet, customer, but that's undertaking a big project. They're like $1 million into it at least, and I don't think they really understand where their customers are yet, and it's very related to what I'm doing. So, yeah, when I got the email from Jim, it was like, yeah, I could use a refresher on this stuff. And from that point of view, I think reminded me of a lot of things that I hadn't thought about in a long time. So, yeah, I don't have anything specific, like I said, because it is more business to business, and how you get those answers is not by putting a bunch of people in the room. Well, usually not. Having said that, I've been in some things where, and this is engineering related, so I have been in some things where, they pay you to show up and talk about engineering, but those are few and far between generally.
Yeah.
Steve Brewster, I had never really reached out or collaborated with an authentic, a credentialed, experienced ethical researcher before. Have either of you guys in any businesses of yours, present or the past, have you worked with a researcher before? I had never.
No, not from the things, that I've been involved with, because I've always been with small companies and technology oriented, and it's all been business to business, so like I said, I've been on the other side, the receiving side, the researcher is behind that one-way mirror, but not on the working on a project.
Yeah, and then when you say credentialed, even Joshua Lysick and I, some of the projects we worked on, like for Sinclair Community College, we worked with a local community college to help them out because of the skills gap. They were having problems attracting the right people, which is still an issue nationally. That's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, Krista. It's not so much the research is the issue. It's also how you get some executives and leadership in academia as well as in these companies to understand a very key piece they're missing out on, and that's who their true customer is, the potential employee, instead of just having generic commercials. Hey, come to work for us. We've been in business for 30 years, and you can have a great career here. And I hear that all the time. But I've done my kind of research is I've got a background in recruiting and career coaching. So I would interview candidates. I love doing that kind of stuff. If I gravitated to two of those 5 areas, it would be the focus groups in the in-depth interviews. And quite honestly, I've utilized all those, either myself or hired it out. I don't know if they've been credentialed or not. It's something that comes natural to me, but I wouldn't want to do any of it full time except for the in-depth interviews and the focus groups, kind of like a round table type of thing.
Yeah, and I think for what you were describing, just in terms of recruitment, you really do kind of have to do the in-depth interviews. Otherwise, it becomes just kind of a generic way to discuss.
Right.
And when you're talking about trying to attract people to maybe a university or a college that really isn't on their radar, you need to know what it is that they want. Some of the fact that a university's been around 30 years may work in their favor in a sense, but then someone might also think, well, does that mean that they're not willing to accept new ideas? What is the culture like? Those kinds of questions. Going back to what I mentioned of the research, just being able to define the problem. What is it that we want to know? And when you meet with clients, right, and you're trying to determine that, you have to have real conversations, just like Jim and I did, just in terms of doing the Fortune Now survey. It was, yes, all of this stuff would be great, but what do we really want to know?
Yeah, when I was saying research methods, the research goals from my starting point I've used that whole idea, with the exception maybe of the ethnography, but that might be my personal clients as I was coaching as a business coach. You're getting that information, that data all the time. That's probably where that came in. But I do want to give you, in case anybody didn't know, lynda.com, at least at our local library, I have free access to it.
I do as well.
Yeah, so Jim or Brewster or Christian, which he's disappeared.
Yeah.
If you are a member of your local library, you can get access to lynda.com, and of course, tons of other research-oriented things on there that some are good and some are not, at least as far as real-time stuff or whatever. But
and the thing is that as you mentioned, some are good and some are not. Luckily, the classes that I've taken, they've been really informative, but it also depends on the time commitment that I have. Some of the coding classes take a little bit more time than I've been allowed lately. But if you can take advantage of some of those classes, I mean, they offer everything from using PowerPoint to Excel. It offers everything. In most cases, it's free. So, it's just another way to increase your knowledge base.
Yeah.
And to be part of the conversation.
Krista, I have another question. Sorry. An in-depth interview, okay? Specifically, for prospective sponsors of 4Gen Now. Now I'm thinking, gee, maybe I can offer that service to some of our paying sponsors. But how do you define an in-depth interview? How would I, is that a number of, what comprises an in-depth interview from your experience?
Well, one of the things to think about before I put a title on it, the in-depth interview, you've probably already been doing this. When you sat down at the summit and you were talking to people and you were finding out more about their business, you were finding out more about their objectives, you were already interviewing them. You just didn't say that. And my point is to make it a conversation. Yes, you're going to have questions that you want to make sure that you get the answers to, but then at the same time, you also want to approach it as an active listening exercise. So you might have a question that drives it, but that question might lead to 5 other questions that you weren't planning on. So it's only semi-structured. That's the way to look at it. Go in with a sense of the questions that you want answers for, but make sure that you're listening to the answers so they can lead to other questions. Mm-hmm. So develop that research instrument, but don't be married to it. And the other thing about the focus group that I wanted to add, it depends on a couple of things. First of all, what your overall goal is, how many people you have that can monitor the focus group, simply because if you might have a moderator and then you might have someone else who needs to really be kind of observing the nonverbal cues as well. As collecting the data, so it just depends on the number of people that you have to help you to monitor the focus group, and then also it depends on your question whether or not 5 people, 10 people can get at the answer that you want. If 5 people can do it, then why go to 20? So you want, but generally when you're doing market research, it's usually a little bit bigger than that, but it just kind of depends on the type of data you want to collect.
Awesome.
Well, hey, one thing I don't know if I picked up on, Krista, who do you actually serve? Who is your target market?
Up until this point, it has been small businesses and organizations. And then in my other, my third prong of what I do, I have served executives from Fortune 500 companies.
Okay.
So I've really just, but they're mostly technology based because that's my area of interest. I will take an area that they have given me and I will research it to death so I can have conversations and things of that nature. That's where my interest lies. So it's technologically focused for sure.
Okay, thanks.
Awesome.
Thank you guys for engaging in this conversation with me. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you. Brewster, anything else? Thank you for joining. If not.
No, Krista, thank you for giving up your lunch to share.
Thank you.
All right. Awesome. Steve, Brewster, thank you. Yep. Krista, thank you. I don't know how many weeks or months we've been chatting, but I really look forward to continuing the collaboration. My final takeaway, and Steve, you hit on it, is, you can tell that you are all in on this. I mean, you just have a very natural, friction-free, authentic, holistic way of talking about it, and very, very refreshing. So thank you for being all in, and thank you for sharing your time and your expertise with our members, which of course will be recorded and downloaded so that any of our members can access. And with the permission of Brewster and Steve, I'll send you their emails so you can continue the dialogue.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you all for allowing me to do this. And as I mentioned really early on in the presentation, this is just one perspective. We could have a series
Oh, yeah.
of webinars about research that I think would be beneficial. But we could have a series of webinars about this, but just a little bit of a snapshot of what goes on.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you very, very much, all.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
The rest of the day. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.